Hey, this is Madeline Sklar.
And Suze Cooper, and you're listening to All Things Audio.
We're ready to dive on in. So first off, we talked a little bit last week about Twitter podcasts coming soon. We don't have a lot of information about it, but you came across this really interesting tweet from Nathan Gathright, who is a product designer at Spotify. And he has some really interesting thoughts on, people are speculating, like, what will this new podcast tab be, since, it's been announced that they're working on something with this, but we don't have details. So you came across a really good thread here that we wanted to share with everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Nathan kind of got me thinking about what this might actually look and sound like. And as you say, there's really not a great deal out there. I have been Googling, I've had Google Alerts set up, all the different things, waiting to hear a little bit more about this potential Twitter podcast. Certainly all the tech press have picked up on it. They've all got their version of the the screenshot that we found there from Alessandro and from Jane Wong last week, which was kind of that reverse engineered look at that sidebar, which had a podcast tab in it with the little microphone icon, and what that might mean for Twitter. And so there's lots of people with lots of different ideas about how that might come together with Spaces, what that might mean for podcasters here on Twitter. But Nathan's thread really, just was sort of an idea sparker for me. He talks about how potentially we could see a top podcasts bar, a little bit like the top articles idea that you can see in that sort of explore area of Twitter. I quite like that idea that you might see those kind of podcasts from, your faves, really, the ones that he's sort of mocked it up here quite cleverly, and it shows the daily and character count and these different kind of podcasts that we might all have tuned into at one time or another. I also wonder, Madeline, we've spoken about before how topics are really useful just in general for finding tweets on specific things here on Twitter, but I feel like they could be utilised more in terms of this podcasting as well. I mean, even Spaces have hooked into the idea that we could tag our Spaces with topics. Do you think that might be a thing? Do you think they might hook on to topics for podcasts as well, if that's the way they go?
I think so. It would be very smart for them to do it, because topics is a feature that's been around for a few years. It's been really underutilized. But once we found out not that long ago that they were incorporating it into Spaces, where, the discoverability of Spaces could be tied into the topics you select, we thought, wow, what a great idea. And it was something I was asking Twitter to do for quite some time, because it just, to me, made such sense. And I could totally see them tying the topics you select to helping you discover podcasts on Twitter as well. So I think it's an excellent idea. It's a great way to use a feature that's just not being used very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the next kind of thought that I've got on this is, where will we be listening to the podcasts? Are we going to be listening right here in Twitter? Are we going to be, linking to them? Or will there be this kind of, Nathan explains it really well in terms of like a floating pop-up, essentially, that sort of says, open this in my podcast player, and sends you out to wherever you would normally listen to podcasts. Or, are they going to try and keep it all in-house and, as ever, try and keep us on the app? Which is a really interesting thought as well. And I really like this third point that he makes is around having a kind of call to action card that will be under your bio. So a little bit like we're seeing with Review, where people who've got their review newsletter. Madeline, you've got yours set up, I've got mine. People can subscribe right there from your bio. They can see what you're all about and then hit subscribe and enter their email address to sign up for your email newsletter. Potentially, could we see a podcast call to action there, where people can see that little avatar, your cover image, a little explanation, couple of lines of what your podcast is, and then a start listening button? How great would that be? And what a great use of that space as well.
I love that idea so much. When I saw him put this in his thread, I'm like, yes, that's brilliant. What a great idea. But where would that be placed? I mean, so many of us are using the newsletter feature, so I imagine it would just go somewhere either above or below that. I'm not sure where else you could really put that. But yeah, in his mock-up here, it's an excellent idea. So super excited to like see this unfold, but love seeing people like Nathan come up with their thoughts of like, this is how I visualize and how I see it coming together. So, and when we open this up for comments from our listeners later, I would love to hear other people's thoughts of what they would like to see with this. And, maybe we need to just start reaching out to Twitter, since they're so great at listening to us about our thoughts about spaces. Maybe they'll do the same with this new podcast feature, and we can start giving them ideas of what we would like.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine that there's not a play here for Spaces replays and, anything, the content being made here on Twitter Spaces somehow being promoted through that feed. I just feel like surely they wouldn't keep that separate, right? They've got to stitch it up somehow.
I think so. And I wouldn't be surprised if they even decide that, many of, like, very recently, they gave everyone who hosts a room in Spaces the ability to record. You and I have had the ability, but we've been beta hosts for a long time. So many of us have had that feature for quite some time. But very recently, they gave this to everyone. So I'm wondering if the reason why they're now coming up with this podcast tab are they going to now consider all recorded rooms and spaces as a, quote, podcast? That would make sense to me. Would it make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm kind of waiting to hear as well. Like, is that what they're going to do? I mean, all of this is total pie in the sky. Like, Twitter haven't confirmed that this is really a thing. They haven't said anything around podcasting particularly. It is all this reverse engineering magic and us kind of wild thinking in terms of what they could do. But I have to say, it seems like an obvious play there to broaden out the audio content that's being created here on Twitter Spaces and allow people to have their own podcast feed version of social audio, which sounds great to me.
I see Andrew's in the room, and he did a tweet that you uncovered asking today to everyone, would Twitter Spaces to YouTube service be of interest? And it's very interesting. I'm so glad you caught that so we could talk about it today. What an interesting idea.
Yeah, I thought this was super interesting, and I'm really hoping that Andrew can hang around and perhaps chat to us about it in a little while. So the tweet shows an animated kind of version of how you might distribute, if you like, your Twitter space over to YouTube. So that it could live over there. It could be branded. It could have auto-generated captions. You could be able to see the Twitter Spaces screen with those who are speaking and the screen captured and everything. I mean, it looks great. I mean, at the moment, I do share our podcast version over on Twitter Spaces, over on YouTube, sorry. And I would recommend that anyone creating a podcast actually distributes to YouTube as well, because there's a whole ton of people who will listen to podcasts over on YouTube despite it being a visual first platform. So to be able to kind of click a button and share the Spaces audio over there sounds like a great idea to me. So yeah, I was really interested to see it. And if Andrew's about towards the end of the space, then perhaps he'll come and tell us more about it, I'm hoping.
I'd want to hear more about it, because I don't know if you've noticed, but YouTube has been saying that they want to get podcasters to put up their videos on YouTube, have a YouTube version. It's really starting to become a bigger thing. I know people tried to do that years ago, and it just wasn't really taking off for very, very many podcasters. But now YouTube is actually really encouraging podcasters to do this. And they're actually going to be throwing money at a lot of podcast creators to do it. So,
absolutely. Yes. And I mean, plenty of people have been, certainly over lockdown and the pandemic and everything, have recorded both video and audio so that they've got both versions. I think prior to that, the platforms seemed to lend themselves either to great video or great audio. Certainly with platforms that are coming through now, like Squadcast, Riverside.fm, they are seeing that people do want good quality both, if at all possible. And, it's because of platforms like YouTube, and there are absolutely plenty of podcast listeners over there. But equally, there are people that would like to see that interview happen as well. So, yeah, it's about that 10 times your content, isn't it? I mean, if you can create it as a video, but then rip the audio off and use that as audio content as well, and then cut that into chunks for audiograms and different clips elsewhere, plus upload it and use it speech to text, as a blog somewhere on your website, then, you're making the absolute most of that idea that you had in the first place to create whatever that video was. So it's, it's great. It's great stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Now we're going to talk about Amazon's new social app, which we very briefly talked about last week, but we have so much more to talk about this week. We're both pretty excited, and unfortunately, you can't access this yet because it's US only. Why on earth are they doing it like that?
Yeah, I know. I am pretty bummed, I have to say. I would love to have played with this. The minute I saw it yesterday announced that Amazon had launched AMP, I was over onto the App Store searching for it, and I was thinking, perhaps it's so new it's just not appeared in there yet. And then I read further down The Verge's article and I was like, oh, it's because it's US only. But you're right. We mentioned this first on episode 18, would you believe, of All Things Audio, where we spoke a little bit about Amazon Live Audio. There was the one link that was going around the internet at that time from Axios that gave very little information about what this might be. And we talked a little bit and speculated a little bit about what it might turn into. So yeah, now it's here. It arrived on the scene yesterday, and you have actually downloaded it, got into it, and you're enjoying it, I think, aren't you, Madeline?
Yeah, it's so funny. This was literally 1 hour before we started this room. What happened was a few days ago, I signed up and it said I was on a wait list. I'm like, okay, great, whatever. I kind of forgot about it. And then I got an email saying, wait is up. Here's the code. You can get in. So it was literally an hour before this room started. And I was like, oh, I got to do this real fast and see like what I can figure out and what I could talk about today. And it's very interesting. And, but here's what's so cool. If you look in my tweet, I don't want to make it this big deal because I don't want the company to get mad at me. I don't know how big a deal they're trying to make about this, but you'll see there is a link if you're, looking at the tweet in the nest, or if you're listening to the podcast version, just check the show notes. Go to their Twitter account, which is onamp_. In their bio, this was really smart of them. In their bio, they have a code that will get you right in, so you don't have to be on the wait list. I did not know this. It's just while I was playing in there, I thought, let me go see if they have a Twitter account. And I found their Twitter account. And then I saw that in the bio. So when I saw some tweets earlier, like Dustin and some other people were talking about it. And I said, just go to their bio in Twitter and there's a code. You'll get right in. So, if you're in the US, you want to get right on in and try this out. So let me tell you a little bit about it because it is pretty super cool. I get a newsletter called The Creator Economy, which is really awesome. And they share lots of information just about the whole creator economy. And they were talking about it in their newsletter. I believe it was yesterday, saying that Amazon announced this new app. It's called AMP, where users create live shared radio shows with their favorite music. So to me, that was very intriguing. I was in the music business for 20 years. So anything with music, I perk up. I remember doing my own internet radio show back in the 90s. And back then, it was not easy to do. It took 2 computers. You had to run 2 computers. It was a lot of work, but it was so much fun. I had so much fun doing that. So AMP is kind of like Amazon's version of Clubhouse and Spaces, going that whole social audio route. But what they're doing that I find so fascinating is they're focusing on turning users into DJs. So rather than making all about hosting conversations, which we all enjoy over here, is really like having conversations, but also having music involved. And they're saying that there are tens of millions of licensed songs available for you to curate for your audience. And doesn't it sound like really interesting? I don't know about you, Suze. I'm fascinated with this. I think it's given me so many ideas of like fun ways to bring people together to talk and play music,
Yeah, I mean, as I always wanted to be the music presenter. I made it as the newsreader, but I was never the host. I was never the presenter of my own radio show. So now, maybe this is my moment. I would love to play some music. I would love to have a chat. I would love to have guests on, all of which is possible within this app. And, I think it's interesting because podcasters and audio creators always hit this wall of licensing. No matter whether you're looking for a little bit of music to, your bed, like we were playing right at the very beginning today of All Things Audio. I was playing the All Things Audio bed. And I'm able to do that because I know we have the rights to it because I made it. And one of the reasons I made it is so that I knew that we would have the rights to it. Because licensing is such a crazy minefield and you can get caught up in it in so many different ways. And certainly, you know, I've listened to podcasts where, you know, you'll hear people talking about a song like from the artist or whatever, and then they'll play it. But in the podcast version, you can't hear that. So they will then just completely skip over the fact that they've played it and start talking about it in hindsight. And it kind of makes sense because you kind of know that they weren't able to play it in that little spot or whatever. But it is an omission because actually you're not getting that full audio experience and really being able to buy into the content that's being put out there because they can't use the song. Now, Spotify introduced late last year a way of creating podcasts in a very modular way whereby you could call in a song from Spotify. Now, if you're playing it directly from Spotify, then it's fine. It's licensed. Everyone who's involved in publishing, writing, creating, performing that song is going to get their royalties and get paid because essentially it drops out of this kind of pre-recorded podcast feed into the actual play of the song on Spotify, just as it would if you were going to stream it yourself via the app, and then dips back into spoken word and dialogue from the podcast again. Super clever and a great way of skirting round that kind of minefield. So yeah, Spotify had kind of tried to do it. I kind of expected that Spotify were going to do it with Green Room, surely. Surely that was kind of where we felt it was heading. However, Spotify's Green Room, they just seem to have lent on their podcasting and their podcast hosts and tried to pull it into that podcast realm rather than the music realm, when actually they were already really known for being a digital streaming provider of music more than they were really for podcasts. And I really feel like they took the wrong route. I mean, surely this is what Green Room should have been doing.
Oh, 100%. I am so surprised Green Room did not go this route. I mean, we had such high hopes for Spotify to do something amazing once they jumped into social audio. And I just don't know what happened. But this is how it should have been. And the screenshots I have on here, let me just kind of explain what I had a very limited amount of time to play with it before our show today. But there was lots of different rooms. There was plenty of people in here. Found all different kinds of rooms. I just kind of scrolled through. You just scroll across room to room to room. And I stopped at this one because this was AMP themselves. They were doing like kind of like a Q&A because people were just coming in, just asking tons of questions. So in the first screenshot, this is me just listening. It shows that there are 35 people. You can do a like, says hearts. It says on the air, so you know when it's live. I don't see an ability to have a replay, but I did see people have rooms scheduled for the future when you're on their profiles. And just like Spaces, you can have 3 topics that are connected to this. So at the bottom here, it shows 3 topics. And at the very bottom, that is a floating player. So I can keep swiping and looking at other rooms and it's still playing at the bottom. And I can exit out, or to the right, that's a stop. It's basically like a stop and then restart. And so the first screenshot is just me finding this room. And the second screenshot, when I actually am clicking in the room, because before that was just me swiping from room to room. When I'm actually in the room, you can see who's speaking, and very much like how, Clubhouse and Spaces, we can tell like who's talking. With this, is around the circle. It changes colors and stuff. So that's how you know who's talking. And so I thought, this is an interesting room. They're talking and sharing feedback. And then the next screenshot, all of a sudden, they stopped with the questions for a few minutes and said, hey, we're going to play a song now. And so they played Rick James, Super Freak. And that was super cool, right? I think that's what makes this so interesting, is that you can have conversations, you can play music, you can be your own radio DJ and take call requests, right? I mean, there's really some neat things we can do here. So I just tried to get some quick screenshots to show off some interesting stuff. The largest room I saw had I think maybe 177 people in one room listening to some guy, and he was talking and playing music. Most of the other rooms had just a handful, if any. So we know this is very, very early on. So once this really gets going and a lot of people are using it, this could be really interesting. And one thing I always like to stress, when there's a new app, that you find interesting, get into it, go play with it, go spend time on it, because when it's brand new, you could end up being one of the big people, like in weeks. I remember when I first got into Clubhouse, and there were not very many people in there at the time. I didn't have the time to really just spend day and night, but a lot of my colleagues were, and they built up huge audiences in a very short period of time, being on there so early. And it's a way to really stand out. So if it's something that really, like this app interests me, so I will probably start spending a lot of time in it. And if it grows and becomes really big, then, if I build this thing up and get lots of followers and put on some fun shows, you never know. I can end up being like one of the top, DJs in this space just because I'm on there so much and I was there early. So just something to think about. If you have early access to something and you really dig it, it's a great way to stand out, because you're going to have that longevity, whereas people are going to come way later, because we know that many times it takes a long time for things. I mean, Clubhouse, it really took a while to take off. When I got in there, it was not very many people, and it was pretty slow going for quite some time. And then it grew and became huge. And then if you waited a long time and then you're like, I think I'll sign up and check this out. Well, we all start with 0 followers. So you get in there and you see people that have tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of followers. It's because they got in there early, and so they got that head start. So just a little bit of advice, when there's a cool new app, you're digging it, like, don't be afraid to just go all in, because it's just a really cool way to stand out. We can't predict which apps are going to be the big apps. We thought Greenhouse was going to be big, didn't we, Suze? It sure could have been.
We were expecting more from Green Room, weren't we? Let's face it. I mean, I assume that the AMP app can do this because it's leaning on its Amazon Music repertoire. I mean, I'm assuming that's how it works. Did you have to have you like Amazon Premium, or, did you have to sign in with a subscription, or?
You have to have an Amazon account, which is very smart of Amazon, very, very smart. So it was very easy to get access because you're using your Amazon login credentials. Super fast, super easy. So yeah, so interesting that, like, if you don't have an Amazon account, you're going to have to get an Amazon account. A login, at least, free account's free. It's not like you got, it's not like it has to be Prime accounts only, which would cost money. So, but it was easy. It was easy to get in and start using. And I will say the quality wasn't like, we're so used to this great audio quality in Spaces. I don't feel like it's quite at the level of Spaces, but it's not bad either. It's kind of reminds me, like with Clubhouse, like when I first got on Clubhouse, it was kind of like, not bad, not great, but doable.
So it really reminds me of the app Stationhead, which we spoke about last year as well, briefly. And that one links to you have to have a premium Spotify or Apple Music account that you kind of log in via. And then you're able to do the same thing. So it is, be your own DJ, choose from the stacks of songs that we've got available, and it's all licensed and it's all fine. And there are lots of people on there that have been doing exactly what you just described, Madeline, that have been on there for the last 6-9 months, really building up these followers. And there were hundreds of people listening to the different stations over on Stationhead, which is where I headed after I realised that I couldn't listen to AMP. I have to admit, I kind of thought, hang on a minute, this sounds a lot like that one. I haven't been in there for a while. What's going on over there? So it's interesting that, that there is an app that's doing it, but Amazon being who they are, I would say they'll probably, corner the market in it, despite, poor old Ryan's attempts with Stationhead. And Stationhead is really popular and is doing really, really well. Just interesting to see, as we've always said, the different ways that social audio can head in. And I would still like to see whether or not, and this, again, pie in the sky thinking, which I'm loving doing today, like, could we ask our Alexa to be playing from the AMP app and listening to our mates doing, when Madeline does her rock show, can I tune in but be listening via my smart speaker? Because,
Oh, I like that.
For me, that that again zips up all the different ends, all the things I'm interested in. So yeah, I think there's a lot more to come from this, and I really can't wait until they open it out to Android users, because it is iOS only, and to a few more people in the world, because it is also US only at the moment. But I think we've got lots more to see from that, and I'd love to hear what people here in the space today think of it. Are you going to use it? Would you like to be a host? Would you like to dip in and listen? Do you think it's something that was needed for the world of social audio? Yeah, we'd love to hear your views.
Well, we just have two more really quick things that you uncovered. I think we should mention real quick.
Sure. So this first one was really interesting. And in fact, they're linked. They're totally linked. So it's about a company based over in Japan, in Kyoto. And they say they've developed the world's first audio metaverse platform. So anyone who's followed me will have seen that I have actually tweeted this link out a few times this week, because I've been trying to see what people are thinking about it, see what do people think about an audio metaverse platform, and also what does that really mean? Does anyone really know? Again, not a great deal of information about it, but this platform is called CubeMint. I have signed up. They are in beta and they're taking sign-ups, but you can't kind of get into anything as yet. They say that CubeMint connects physical reality and virtual spaces through sound in three-dimensional audio spaces that users can mint and explore together while talking to each other. So there's an NFT element here, which I know, Madeline, you've been super interested in NFTs, and I'm definitely interested in finding out about minting kind of audio content and different things like that. So they're really taking that on. But the idea that you can just pop your AirPods in and be in this kind of virtual audio space, yes, we're already doing that right here. They're saying it's going to be immersive, so perhaps they're thinking more along the spatial audio, like Clubhouse has introduced over there. It's certainly one that I'm going to be watching. As I say, I've signed up to get an invite for the beta version. Nothing's come through as yet, but they are starting to promote it and starting to talk a little bit about it. And what we do know about it is right here in this link that was in Japan today during the week. So yeah, an interesting one. What do you make of it, Madeline?
It's super interesting. I mean, both of these that you uncovered, I just put in the nest the other one too, called CubeMint. And these sound fascinating, the way they're coming up with audio in the metaverse. And so I'm really, because yes, I've been like really into NFTs, learning all about what's going on with Web3, metaverse and NFTs. And all of this I find super fascinating. So I can't wait to see more about this and learn like how to utilize audio in the metaverse and on a platform like this. So I'm so glad you found these, and that's what we're here to talk about, all things audio, and this is going to be that new direction we're going to start seeing as Web3 progresses.
Absolutely. And what I love about talking today is that we've actually picked up on two things that we spoke about back in September. One week we were talking about Stationhead. The following week, we then spoke about this new Amazon live audio announcement. What was that going to be? And then, a few months down the line, it comes back round and there's a bit more information and we can return to it and kind of really dig into it a bit more. So I'm hoping that, in 6 months' time, we're talking a bit more about CubeMint and signing up and diving in to find out what it's all about. So all good stuff.
Absolutely. Super excited. Well, we've got some speakers here.
Hi, Jeff. We'll come to you now.
What's up? Let me just say that, I've been hosting a very similar space. In fact, two of my co-hosts are here, Anne and Misha. Morgan also joins the room I host, and so does Michael. I see a lot of the people who come to my show as well, called This Week on Clubhouse. And I'm not here to shill. I'm just saying that, I love what you're doing. And I think there's room for collaboration here. Because we have very similar ways that we're thinking about this space. And I just want to talk about it with you guys. That's all I care about, because that's what I love talking about. So I'm here to just say great show so far. I'm happy to touch on Amazon AMP a little bit. I used it pretty for like 30 minutes last night. And I have a couple gripes with it myself. And also some glaring things. And then I think, Suze, why you can't use it in the UK has to do with the licensing with regard to the music.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That sounds...
But I'll stop talking there for now.
No, don't. I want to hear your gripes. I need to know what your gripes are.
Because of the lawyers and the way that the deal is set up, you can only play like 3 songs from an artist in a period of time. You can, or a number, or X number of times songs on an album. There's also like the fact that you can't talk at all while a song is playing, which I find really frustrating as someone who's like, I have a mixer. So I connected, like I'm talking to you guys through my mic on my mixer and stuff. And when I tried to do that on Amazon Amp, first of all, nothing on the mixer went through, was completely like silenced. So no music that I was playing or barely any sound effects made it through to the other end, and nobody heard it. Yeah, so it was just really frustrating for sure.
I think that will be because of the player. Because you're streaming, as I say, you're streaming from the music provider. So at that point, you don't have any access to alter or change any of that audio. It plays out as it is. So therefore, it's kind of on a separate stream, I would imagine, from wherever the kind of dialogue, social audio side of it is coming from. Michael, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I tried it out too, Jeff, with my Rodecaster. And actually, I had somebody in the room who verified that he could hear the sound effects on it and so on. So I'm wondering if there was a connection issue.
No, well, the sound effects went through. The sound effects went through if you bump them up on volume on the slider, but anything coming through like from my computer did not. So it was, and if it did, if I like really bumped it up, if I tried to get it as loud as possible, it just sounded terrible anyway. So it's probably an audio issue. Suze, I do agree with you. It probably has to do with the way it's built. But frankly, I think that's a really terrible way of thinking about designing something like that. Because if you think about Discord and how voice chats in Discord work, where you can bring in a bot and play music and you can still talk to other people. You can have the music playing and adjust the volume and all that stuff. And I think that's terrible design, in my opinion, if we're being honest about it.
Yeah, interesting. That's and Rodecaster woes with each of these social audio apps. Like just as you get it to the point where you can plug everything in and it all works, someone brings something else out and throws another curveball. So I feel your pain there. I totally feel your pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but thank you. Thanks for talking about AMP. Eternal, you're back.
And what's your name?
My name is Otema. My username is Eternal Women, which is the name of my nonprofit organization that's a women's and girls empowerment organization. And I'm thinking about doing a podcast, but we're literally on every single social media platform, and I'm not sure about how much time I would need to invest or how much the team would need to invest. One of my friends is a podcaster, and they've just started. And they speak about all the processes and things that it takes to do it. And they're trying to encourage me, but I'm still kind of on the fence. So that's another reason why I clicked into this space to see, start getting my feel for whether or not I actually want to do a podcast.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Certainly my thoughts are always, what is the reason behind the podcast? What is the value add that it gives to whoever you're trying to attract? Is it that you want to get an audience that you're not already in front of in another place? In which case, you've got more value behind putting the time into the creation of the podcast, and it does take time. And also thinking around what is your subject, and coming up with at least kind of 6 to 8 episode ideas before you start uploading things, because otherwise pod fade is real and you will lose the momentum fairly quickly. So there's quite a bit to think about in terms of ensuring that your podcast will last, and to just think about that. It's the epic question: why? What's the reason behind doing the podcast? And if it all aligns and you've got a full-on reason why, and you can, really tally that in your mind to it's worth doing this for this outcome to reach this particular group of people, or even in a way, as I mentioned earlier briefly, about, well, I can do this, but actually I can make so much more out of this audio. So this content is worthwhile doing. I can create the blog out of it or a newsletter out of it as well, or, you know, really repurpose it and drain it for everything it can give you, so that you're putting that effort in, but you're getting a lot back from it at the same time. That's always kind of my pointer when people think about, should I do a podcast? Because there's a lot of podcasts out there.
Yeah, Suze, I love that. I did a podcast and I stopped actually when I literally probably stopped doing it a couple months into using Clubhouse. Because I felt like that was a space that could replace podcasting for me. Podcasting for me feels very lonely. Even with a guest. I love the dynamic and like the interaction you can have between multiple people, and I just couldn't go back to traditional podcasting, if you know what I mean. And I think that I did 80 plus episodes, so I think what you're saying rings true. It makes a lot of sense. You have to kind of find, because we're all super busy, we're all doing a lot of stuff, we're all building here in this space, and if a new app comes out and it's intriguing to you, yeah, spend some time on it. I agree with what Madeline said. But at the same time, you also have to take into account that you're going to still have to spend time in the communities that you built elsewhere. So and burnout is real. And so be very, very careful and make, conscious decisions where you spend your time and how you spend it.
Totally. And all that said, podcasting is amazing fun. I love it. And, putting something together, the satisfaction of pushing that out there and then putting together for the next week. I love doing it. But, it without a team, sometimes it can get very difficult, as you say, Jeff. You want other people to be able to take on a few episodes or, come up with some more ideas. So, yeah, surround yourself with the right people. Make sure you're producing the content for the right people, and it should all slot into place, hopefully.
I agree 100%. It's a great marketing tool, because Susan and I have been podcasters for a very long time. And even though podcasting is so popular now and everybody's doing it, it's still a great way to get your voice out there and to be heard. And like Suze was saying, you can do so much repurposing, which is one of the things I love about it. And like what we're doing here, we wanted to do a room in Spaces, and then very quickly, it's a weekly. We do this every week. We've been doing it for a year now, Suze, I guess, a long time.
Almost. It's nearly our birthday.
We decided to turn it into a podcast because we're podcasters and we love the power of podcasting. So why not take the audio and turn it into a podcast? So it's available on all your favorite podcast players. We're pretty much, and if not, let us know. We'll make sure we get on there. We got a lot of other speakers today, Suze. I realize we got a lot of people that want to talk.
Well, we have got a lot of people here, and I want to speak to Nathan because we did highlight his amazing Twitter thread on Twitter podcasts and what that might mean. Nathan, thanks so much for putting that together. It was so comprehensive, and it really got me thinking.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting it. My what I'm curious about is, a lot of those ideas that I suggested were really not so much about Spaces, which is probably what Twitter might be doing with a little podcast tab, but more about podcasts that people tweet out and stuff like that. And a lot of those ideas basically would only work. There's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem with them, where they really are only worth doing if enough people are tweeting out links to podcasts and stuff like that. So what do you think is a feature Twitter, maybe could implement that would help, kickstart that flywheel, and, you end up with a virtuous cycle if more people are tweeting podcast links, then those other podcasting features become more valuable and people are spending more time on Twitter, and, then the cycle loops. So I was curious if y'all had any thoughts about, what it would take for this to become a serious part of Twitter.
Nathan, do you remember Twitter Music by chance?
No, not actually. I've been on Twitter for a long time, but not particularly, no.
Okay, so I think that was, 2013, 2014, maybe 2014. They launched a Twitter Music. They called it Twitter #music. And it was essentially kind of what you just described, but with music. And they shut it down within a few months. So I don't know. Twitter thinks up and then kills a lot of things. But I'm sorry, I'll just stop talking for now, Morgan. And Suze, go ahead.
They do, but they did buy, was it Breaker?
Yeah,
a while ago, and then that kind of got like
they did.
no one's heard any more about that, which makes me feel like this is part of a longer roadmap for them in terms of podcasting, and like they have got a plan with it. Madeline, do you know more about that?
I think that's where that's going for sure. Yeah, I think that's what we're going to see. I mean, there's a great point from Jeff. I mean, Twitter does have a history of bringing things to light and then removing it very quickly. But I think Spaces has really shown that people are very interested in audio, and they see that a lot of us are turning our Spaces into podcasts. So to me, it just makes sense that they go in this direction, especially with some of these acquisitions from last year with some of these different apps related to podcasting.
Also tie into the newsletter. They have Review. They own Review, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
So when you like, and literally what Susan and you guys were and Madeline was talking about earlier, was using all your content and in all the places you can to get as much reach as you can and get in front of as many people as you can.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see it positioned in between Facebook adding podcasts to Facebook pages so that, a Facebook page for a podcast can automatically post links to episode, and then also next to Substack, which does have like an audio feature where you can do like an audio post. So between, those two things, Twitter podcasts, maybe falls somewhere on that spectrum of which part of their, market they're trying to defend or attack more. Are they just trying to give people more creator tools, more ways to join the conversation, and, post content out there? Or are they trying to give people tools, there's some through line there between those two different competitors that I think is really interesting for what Twitter podcasts could be.
Absolutely. Morgan, I saw that you had your hand raised. Have you got some comments on this one?
Yeah, no, it was only a quick thought. There's a question here that goes to the chicken and egg question. So Michael and I were talking about how you would integrate recorded spaces and podcasts, and could we see Twitter adding straightforward RSS feeds alongside recorded spaces, and what the pros and cons of that would be. So that's an interesting question. And there will obviously be, I think, disadvantages to doing something like that, as we see things like clipping mechanics added to spaces, which will really help the spread of recorded spaces. And you assume clipping mechanics can't really be applied to podcasts pulled in through RSS feeds. So there's a general question about where this industry shifts and how the relation between live social audio and podcast develops. But I don't know, you could see that adding RSS feeds alongside recorded spaces would be a way of trying to leverage the interest in spaces and how that could be promoted in this platform to also bringing some attention to the podcasts that are being pulled in off platform.
Yeah, super interesting. Andrew, you have a mic, and I wanted to speak to you a little bit about your tweet earlier today, which, give us more information about it, about how Twitter Spaces could be linked up with YouTube in a seamless action. Tell us more.
Hey, Madeline. Hey, Suze.
Yeah, it's great having you here with us.
Yeah, great show as always. Yeah, so essentially, as you know, I like to play about with things, and I've had this in the back burner for quite some time, and I had a few moments today, and I thought I'd share it because I'm having some interesting conversations with brands who suddenly realise that they really should be making more out of the effort and the content that they're putting in when creating Twitter Spaces. So I began exploring all of the angles on how you can repurpose it, but it struck me that being able to get it onto YouTube and again reach a potential large audience who know nothing about your subject matter or your brand in particular, but also they may not even know about Twitter Spaces. So the fact that they can then think, well, Christ, I can come over to the live show, which you can leave in the comments, and they realize there's another one coming next week, and then they can join in live. Or you could actually just go live with the Twitter Spaces on YouTube as well at the same time.
Okay, so in a way, this would be broadcasting to both at the same time, as opposed to recording it over here on Spaces and then sort of sharing it over?
Well, you've got two angles. So you've got the ones that have already done all the recording. So they've got 30 days worth of archive. So if they're doing a 5-day show, for example, they might have 20 pieces of content running an hour long. There's 20 hours of content at the moment in 30 days' time will be lost forever.
Yeah, and that's a big deal really at the moment, isn't it, for those of us that are on here regularly putting this stuff out, and you know the replay isn't there for longer than 30 days. So it's a good way of lengthening the amount of time, the lifespan, if you like, of the audio content.
Yeah, and I think you've got to, again, add if you're putting it onto YouTube, there has to be some element of visualization to make it a little bit interesting for the audience, potentially. I mean, the audio is great, of course, we know that. But if you can add a few bells and whistles, and why not? And if you can make the captions slightly more usable so that, again, you hit a whole usability angle, I think that's very interesting to make that front and center. Again, opens up a whole new level of audience participation. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the sort of larger captions and captions being a bit more front and center, I think has got to be a good thing. I just think looking at the kind of prototype that you've pulled together here, I like the branding on it as well. And I feel like that is going to speak to a lot of these kind of corporates and businesses that have thought about doing this. If they can have their logo and their branding and their colours on it, I actually think that could make quite a difference.
Yeah, the skinnable, again, you kind of know my thoughts on the purple box. This is just a simple elevation of that, making it branded, extend the storytelling process. I think campaigns will be very interested in this because suddenly it opens up the audience to a much larger wallet, as it were, because you're not just targeting a Twitter Spaces unit, going after campaigns that they may already be used to spending money with. And of course, then you've got the YouTube Shorts, which again, they're very keen to get that clipping facility. So you then open the option of repurposing the content, getting it onto that. We've already worked out how you can post the links into Instagram and have those click over to your live Twitter Spaces. And again, it's just another way to make sure that your conversations can be heard by the largest audience possible.
Sure. And of course, over on YouTube, of course, the monetization set up, you're talking there about, well, you've got like this show's like an hour long, hour plus of content there, being able to drop ads in between that and monetize it in some ways, also potentially a draw for people too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So where is this at then? Is this part of the Spaces dashboard, and is this something you're sort of setting up with individuals, or where's it heading?
It's not fully decided yet. I'm working with a couple of brands to run some pilots with them. And then once we find out a few of the bugs, I'll then know the appropriate audience to showcase it. But you know me, I like to make sure I open up for as many people as I can. So I will let you know as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Andrew, for coming on and chatting about it. Danielle, you've been very patient waiting there. Hello.
Hi, Suze. Hi, Madeline.
Hi, Danielle.
I just wanted to start off by saying that I, listen to the podcast version, but just being here live is a whole different vibe. So I'm glad that I made it today. And my question kind of ties into that. I was thinking about people who have larger audiences, like Russell Brand or Lewis Howes. And I just wondered if, do they ever host rooms on, on Spaces or on Clubhouse, on a social audio app where the audience would have a chance to, interact with them live, and how you think something like that would be handled. Because I can see you were saying you had more, speakers than you expected today, and to kind of, manage that. And, like how with somebody with a, really huge audience, how they might, be able to manage something like that. And if you think that, that would even be possible, because it's just, it's amazing for the audience to, not just listen in, even if you're listening in live, but to have the, the possibility there to, to ask, to ask a question or to have a short conversation with something like that. So what do you think about that?
Well, Andrew has just DM'd me to say that Dolly Parton was live on Spaces earlier today, apparently doing a read from her book. So yes, there are celebrities.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
She was on Clubhouse last week, actually, too.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, and there was the Adele space as well. I think Oprah interviewed Adele. That was on Clubhouse, wasn't it? A few months ago now. So I think celebrities have been doing them, have been around. As ever, discoverability is just diabolical. And so people don't hear about these things until afterwards. Like, I'd have quite liked to have listened to Dolly Parton reading from her book. I didn't know it was happening. So yeah, that they are picking up on it. People are doing it. In terms of how to moderate a larger room, that's actually been a bit of a running theme over the last few weeks, particularly as Clubhouse has launched its new room chat, because we've been talking about how, do we really want that kind of text-based feature within what is essentially an audio space? And one of the great points that's been brought up that has actually changed my opinion on whether or not we need that chat in the audio space is that, it allows people to say that they're there and say what it is, say that they've got something great to say about it, rather than putting their hand up or just requesting, or, they can actually get in touch with the host and explain why they feel they should take the mic. And it allows, the host to be drawn attention to the fact that that person might be there. They might be an expert on the subject that's being talked about. There could be a celebrity hosting the room or whatever, and another few celebrity friends down below. And, if you're scrolling through tens of thousands of people, I'm guessing you might miss a few of these things. So, a chat feature potentially highlights those issues to the host and helps with moderation in some way. I mean, we've got Jeff, we've got Michael on here that have hosted rooms and spaces. In terms of moderating large groups of people, what would your thoughts be on it?
Hey, Suze. So, I've moderated fairly large rooms before. I would say I still do to this day, I guess too. But I guess I would say that when it comes to moderating a room, so the room chat feature, I've done several rooms on this myself, talking about it. And actually, we had the product guy who works at Clubhouse. His name is John Milinovich. And he was taught, and he basically answered a bunch of questions for us, which was great. And so the Clubhouse, the team has been forthright to come out and talk to the community about what they're building and how they're thinking about it, which I think is great. It sounds like here on Twitter Spaces, where I don't spend nearly as much time as it sounds like you guys do, that the Twitter Space team is also taking an interest in avid users of the app or the feature in Twitter's case. And I think that the room chat, what I'm getting at is that the room chat was, to me, I thought it was going to be the worst. And I was like, you know what? But by the end of a room doing the first room about it, when we broke that it might be coming or something, I was like, you know what? This is probably going to be a feature I love the most. And it was. I really liked it.
That's so funny, because I was totally against it as well. I was like, no, this is an audio platform. I'm here for listening and talking, and I don't want to be tapping at my screen, and I don't really, want to have to look at my screen to see what other people are saying in the chat, and it will just be a distraction. But then during the course of a conversation in all things audio about it, I did have my mind changed around it, because I figured, yeah, there is a use for that. It could be really useful. And it does allow for other conversations on the topic, or even off the topic, to be going on while the main content is happening. And in those larger rooms, that is a way of joining in and being part of the community and being immersed in what's going on. So yeah, it's funny that you should say that. Michael, what's your thoughts?
Thank you. I was going to say one dynamic that we have found that it sort of throws into the mix is that if you're going to have that room chat enabled, you really need to have an extra moderator who can kind of be monitoring it. because the person who's leading the actual audio conversation needs to lead the audio conversation. And it can be incredibly distracting if that person is checking out the chat. Oh, haha, that was funny. I see what you said there, Johnny. And, like the conversation just doesn't flow well. So I think one thing that I've found is I have somebody like Cindy Lou Miller who's coming into my rooms now, who's being one of those chat moderators. And then at times when you do a room reset, you check in with them and say, okay, so Cindy Lou, what's going on in the chat? And they'll kind of give a report on that. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of texting in general, whether to people on iMessage or a chat or whatever. I prefer those audio conversations, but I totally appreciate that other people like it. So thanks.
Yeah, that sounds good. That was always my role in Zoom webinars. Whenever I was called in to support on a Zoom webinar, I was always the chat person. And I'd be the one that was thrown to say what the topics of conversation going on in the chat were for whoever was actually facilitating the main webinar. So that sounds great.
Thank you to all of our speakers who came on and shared so much great stuff. And we're available in all of your favorite podcast apps. We're out there, All Things Audio. You can also go to allthingsaudiopodcast.com as well.
You certainly can. And you can catch us here on Twitter and use the hashtag AllThingsAudio, and we'll pick that up throughout the week. So that's it for this week. But thank you so much to everyone that's been here in the space with us and those of you listening. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Bye, everybody.